Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Demai Perek Aleph Halacha Gimel. We're going to be learning Daf Zayin. We left off on Daf Zayin Amud Aleph on the top line. We are towards the end of the Mishnah. Let's go over from the beginning of the top, from Chalas Am Haaretz. We're going to go through the final cases again, in which the Mishnah points out that various foods that are kodesh are completely exempted from the laws of the Mai. And we're going to learn in the Mishnah machlokes regarding ta'aroivas damai, as we will explain. And we actually paskin that ta'aroivas damai halachically is exempt from the tithings, from the giving off of the maisris that the mai has to be giving. But we'll see in the Gemara that Rabbi Yechanan had a chumrah. We will also be discussing the isur of planting tevel. We're going to speak out when we learn this that there's really a machlokes rishonim, whether the prohibition of planting tevel is midoraisa or midrabanan, and we're going to see how that all relates to planting the mai. And what we will have beginning today, going into tomorrow, is some very famous Haggadah, a lot of which we have in Chulin, ironically also on Daf Zayin. The Mishnah stated that if a person purchases produce, not plants, purchases produce for the feeding of animals, like all of the other cases in the Reisha of the Mishnah, that if the person who's buying it from the Ma'aretz is not buying it for consumption, it's completely exempted from the laws of the Mai. And the guys, again, make no mistake, that if I have Tevel Vadai, I may not feed it to my animals, because one cannot even have Hana'ah from Tevel. But the Mai, if I even only buy it for my animals, it's completely exempted. I don't have to give off any trumas or maisris, because don't forget again that Amoritz is claiming that he gave it all, and that will lead us into, again, beginning today with the Haggadah, a famous story of the donkey of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, how that donkey, reflecting the level of the behavior of his owner, of the tzaddik Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, the chamoir didn't even eat produce that's the mai. Now all of that will be a problem to our Mishnah, because if a human who's buying food to feed their animals is not obligated in the laws of the Mai, is the Chavade, the animal himself, right? What do you mean a Chumrah? Why would there be an issue for a behemoth to eat produce that's the Mai? We're going to speak about that, but from that story, we'll see how far we'll get. There are unbelievable stories in which we will see the beyond the letter of the law behavior of Rav Pinchas ben Yair, the koyach that he had on nature. Not only did his donkey should behave in a more refined manner, we'll have a story how he communicated to mice or to rats that were eating up other people's produce, and a lot more. And whatever we don't finish today, God willing, we're going to be learning on Daf Ches. So, Chavra, just quickly, let's go back to the top. We're Daf Zayin Amud Aleph. We are towards the end of the Mishnah, the third part of the Mishnah, the Sefer of the Mishnah, Chalas Am Haaretz. So here we have an Am Haaretz. Now, I just want to say like this, that when an Am Haaretz touches produce that was muksher to be mekabel tuma, it becomes tamei, right? Because just like we don't trust Am Haaretz b'negeya tuma somaisis, we don't have that. He doesn't have the credibility in Am Haaretz regarding tuma and tara. So we have to also deal with that. That's why the top marafulda that we didn't learn yesterday, he's explaining that the challah from a dough that belongs to Am Haaretz, if the dough was needed by the Am Haaretz, there are other issues. The kohen cannot eat it because challah, that's tamei, like truma, that's tamei, may not be consumed. So look inside the top marafulda. Challah Am Haaretz shetika moy gevil chavit, that the kneader was a chavit. In other words, there is no issue of tuma and tara. The only issue is that the dough came from grain. The grain that Am Haaretz, the owner, is saying, I gave up all of the trumas umaisis. Yechrin Kohen Gadol, in other words, we chavedim, we don't trust him fully. Nevertheless, the challah that he removed, that the kohen receives, is completely exempted from the dinam of the mai. The next case is meduma, as we explained yesterday. So let me go slow. First of all, we're going to follow there was really a machlokes rishonim whether the ratio of 100 to 1 that is needed to be mevatel truma that falls into chulin, whether that's doiraisa or the rabbanon, there is a pasuk. The question is whether the pasuk is a asmachta or not. That's not relevant for our topic. The bottom line is that if you have, let's say, one apple that falls into 100 apples of truma, it's completely bottled. Yes, we will have to give one of those 101 apples to the kohen, but the other 100 is bonafide chulin. But if it's called meduma, a mixture means that halachically there was no bittul. Why? Because you don't have the ratio of 100 to the 1, even if it's 91 to 1 or less. So then the din is whether it's the Irais or the Rabbanon, everything is called meduma. What does that mean? Just to know what that means. First of all, let's say I have 50 apples into which one apple of truma fell into. Now I have 51 apples. The owner will have to sell the 51 apples to a kohen, but he won't charge for 51 apples, he'll only charge for 50 apples. Now, this is a big loss to the owner, because produce that may only be eaten by a kohen, even though the kohen has to pay for it, has a lot less value than produce that may be eaten by all Yidden, by all people. Avada. So the more demand, the more expensive something is. You have less kohanim. It's only a small percentage of the Jewish people. But that's the law. The law is that it's a loss to the owner. It's a loss to the owner because only a kohen is allowed to buy. Now the Mishnah is speaking about a case.
Rabbi.
Yes.
With the meduma, does the kohen have to then treat it, all that meduma, the same way he treats his regular truma?
Wait. So when the kohen gets normal meduma, 51 apples, one apple he doesn't have to pay for. The other apples he has to pay for with a lesser, cheaper price. But the kohen doesn't know which one is truma, so all of the chumras of truma go on all the apples. Now, the case in our Mishnah is that the apple that you have meduma, normal meduma, guys, normal, that means real truma gedoyla, falls into the Ama'aritz's chulin. Who said it's chulin? Who says it was tied to Ama'aritz? And it's meduma. So now goes a kohen and the kohen buys it. So you would think, okay, the kohen bought the 51 apples. He didn't have to pay for one apple. The other 50 apples, the Amaretz is saying was chulin. How do I trust him? Chazal said you can't trust him. If I would have stam bought 50 apples from an Amaretz, whether I'm a kohen or whether I'm a Yisrael, I can't eat it because it's meduma. I have to separate Trumas Meiser. I have to separate Meiser Sheni. Chiddush here is that Chazal never made the takana of the mai on meduma, especially if we're going to go with the shita that the whole idea of meduma ratio 101 is only midrabanan. Midoraisa was batal baroy. The whole thing was already a chiddush that only a kohen can get it. There's already a drabanan here. On that scenario, they didn't add, and the other 50 apples, by the way, they're chulin. They were chulin. Who says the Amoris, we don't trust him? That we don't do. Once it's meduma, there is no chiv of the mai anymore. That's something I didn't feel I fully explained yesterday. The next case, this is amazing. Every case is amazing.
Can I ask one more question on that, Rabbi?
Sure. Yes.
In terms of meduma, you're giving the example of less than 1 and 100. But would meduma also be 1 and 3 or 1 and 2? Meaning I have an apple of demai and it falls in with 3 others, and now it's all mixed. So if we're saying it's not bottled within this meduma, does that mean now what do I do with those 4 apples of demai?
Very good. So let me speak it out even better. If 1 and 1, if it's 1 and 1, that we're speaking about Amaretz, who's claiming that apple A is truma and apple B is chulin. If they get mixed together, since you don't have a roiv, a bittul beroiv, both of them have to be viewed like their truma. Period. Truma Gedoyla, with the chumra of the truma. Now, guys, Truma Gedoyla, when the kohen receives Truma Gedoyla, he doesn't have to tithe anything. There's nothing for him to do. He just has to be noyeg din. If it's 1 and 2, and the owner, again, midarabanan, will sell it to the kohen will pay for 2, even though he's getting 3. From there until the case that we gave, where there's 100 to 1, he has to be noyeg the din of truma on all 3. But he doesn't have to be concerned that on top of that, from the three, I have to separate a meisim and a meisim. From the three, I have to separate meiser sheni. You don't have to do that. Exactly, Danny. Which once there is a mixture, on mixtures, there's no din of the mai. Next case in the Mishnah. So look inside the Mara folder. The normal case, the Mara folder is the last line above the Gemara, 4 lines from the top of the Amid. Halakuach bekesev meiser sheni. Shalokach demai. This is what happened, guys. You have money of meiser sheni, and the Mara folder makes it clear that money either came from meiser sheni shal demai, then there's no chiddush. We're saying even if the money that you have is because you separated meiser sheni vadai, and you exchange it on money. Now you're coming to Yerushalmi HaKodesh, the heads, and in Yerushalmi HaKodesh, what do you do with the money? You have to buy produce. From whom do you buy produce? What happens if you buy it from an Amoritz? So the Mishnah is saying that if you used money of Meiser Sheni to buy produce that the Amoritz is saying is chulin, you are noyed chulin. There is no din demai on that anymore. And not on top, in other words, if not, there'll be like a double Meiser Sheni. You bought the produce, but then you say, ooh, from Amoritz, the fight that I have to separate from it. You don't have to do that. And now the final case in the Mishnah before the Machoik is Shiyarim Menachas. What Shiyarim Menachas? I'll tell you a simple heaven. When a Yid has to bring a carbon mincha, if the owner is not a kohen, if the one who's bring the bala carbon is a non-kohen, so the general rule of a mincha is that the kohen or the kahanim remove a koimitz, a kemitza. The kemitza is offered and burnt on the mizbeach, and the shenayim is eaten by the kahanim. Now, of course, that if the person who's chayv in a mincha will buy the flour in the Beis Hamikdash, there's nothing to talk about. You're buying the flour from chaverim. What happens if a yid comes to the Beis Hamikdash with his own mincha, which is allowed, as we learned in Masechta Menachos? Now there are many dinim. It has to be super sifted. The owner did all that. I'm allowed to bring my own raw material. Like I can bring an animal to the Beis Hamikdash, or I can buy the animal in the Beis Hamikdash. You have both options. So the Amoritz brings his flour for a carbon mincha. The kohanim took up the kemitza, and now you have shenayim. So the question is, do the kohanim of that beisav that get to eat the shenayim, do they have to say, ooh, who brought all that? The Amoritz brought the flour. Maybe the Amoritz did not take a full of the tumas umaisis. They don't have to have such a worry. There is no takana. Vadai that when a yid brings his own material for a carbon, no matter how big the Amoritz is, the Amoritz vadai, when he's saying he took off all of the tumas umaisis, he has the manus. That's the last case. What
happened if he didn't?
What happens if he didn't? It's a terrible thing. Because what happened if he didn't? So let me just speak it out. We're going to get to that soon. Guys, tevel, just to know like this. Not only is there an issue, if a person eats it, God forbid, there's a misa b'dei shomayim, but midoi raisa, tevel is asur b'hana'ah. So how can I
bring a cover? Is that called hana?
Of course I'm getting hana. Even though you can argue maybe a mitzvah's lavli hana snitnu, okay, you can maybe counter-argue that. It's a problem. You're for sure not allowed to do it. And then you're being machshel the kohanim to eat, God forbid, tevel. That means that maybe even achilas mizbeach.
But one second, can I take my tevel and just donate it to the Bedek Habayis?
Of course you could, but the Bedek Habayis knows that it's tevel and they're going to separate it from musumais. It's something else.
I think this will go and make
sure.
Now, once it goes to
no, I think once the chiyuv was chal, we learned this in the previous Masechta. It's about this man. Once the meruach happened and the chiyuv was chal, it doesn't matter what happens later. And we're going to learn about this, Danny. Don't worry. Okay, let's go back. Now, the Mishnah is speaking about Shemen Arev. Now, Shemen Arev is just a great example. Shemen Arev means that they used to make a spiced oil, fragrant oil. How do you make fragrant oil? You put in it spices. Yeah, if you know how you do it, even though when we learned about this, we learned about it when they made the ketleres. You put it in there, you soak it in there, you remove it at some point. Shemen Arev is oil mixed with spices. Spices, we're speaking about spices that don't need to be tithed at all. Because tithings, we already learned, has to be something that's going to be consumed. This is something that was grown and inserted for its fragrance. It's not under the dinim of Trumas Umaisis. So when you have Shemen Arev, which means it's oil, and it has in it spices, so that's called, there is a mixture. It's taroivis. Some of the material doesn't have to be tied at all. Oil has to be tied. So what's the din? And you buy it from the Amaretz. Beis Shammai holds, so what? Since the shemen part of it has to be tied, even though the Amaretz is saying he did it, that's the whole point of the mai. We don't trust him fully. So Beis Shammai Amar Chayvim. Beis Hillel Paitrim. In other words, Beis Hillel holds that the whole takana of the mai was never made on a mixture. If it's a mixture, it's exempt thereof. And we're going to learn beginning. We're going to have a lot more about this later. But even on Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, all the way in the bottom, even though we paskin like Beis Hillel, as the rule normally is, we will see that some people were machmir, a chumrah, as we'll see. Okay. Let's begin with the Gemara. So the first category of exemptions in the Mishnah was when, this is the Chiddush, right, Rabbi Blau, the person who planted the produce planted it to eat. The Amoritz, he planted it, he harvested it, the Zman Achiyuv came, he separated, he sells it to a chaver. If the kavana of the chaver, while he purchased it, the Mishnah gave so many examples, was lazera, was labehema, was for fragrance, was not to eat, since the Amoritz is saying he tied it, there is no obligation of the mai. That's what we learned. The first case was lazera. Says the Gemara that mikiven shalakachoi lazera. What is important is the kavana, the intent during the purchase, while he purchased it. When he bought it, since he bought it, lezera, loishanya, we do not differentiate whether he davar shazarei kala, whether it is something that if you taka plant it, it will completely disintegrate, which is what normally happens when you plant, whether it is grains, whether it is, we learned in Hasidus about from yesh to a whole different type of yesh. You have to have an ayin be'emtza, but then you have certain exceptional onions, for example, all onions, and many other vegetables, she'ein zarei kala, that when you put it into the ground, what you put in there does not fully disintegrate. It grows from it. It stays and it grows weiter. Now, there is a big nafkamina. We'll see if a person plants tevel, what the din will be, and there is a nafkamina, as the Gemara will say soon, whether zarei yek kala, zarei not kala. That difference is not shayach. So if I bought it, lizera, we don't make any nafkamina. Bein he davar shezarei kala, he davar shein zarei kala. In all of the scenarios that, let me say it like this: I planted that, and then I want to eat it. Then I planted the onion. We're not concerned. The original onion was the mai. It's not the mai, since it was bought lizera. Even if it itself will be eaten later, because she'ein zarei kala, it will not disintegrate.
But you never planted it.
Most of the Gemara is going to say also, we'll see in a moment. You can change your mind later. We'll get that, So first of all, it doesn't matter whether it's zarei kala or not. It will, it's a chiddush. Even though she'ein zarei kala, which means you will end up eating it, doesn't matter. I didn't buy it to eat it. I bought it to plant it. And even if the it that I'm planting will remain, and I will end up eating it, that's not. Now, when it grows later, I have to separate the tumas or meises from the new product. But I don't also have to separate from the original. Rabbi Yechanan, says Rabbi Yechanan, and not only is it said by an Amayda, but the Gemara is saying, which is really Rabbi Yechanan. He found afterwards, we found the same law in a Baraisa, that if as long as during the time of the purchase, the kavana of the buyer, who's the chaver, was to plant it, even if later he changed his mind, he never planted it, doesn't matter. Bo'in machshava. I'm sorry. Forget. Guys, I take it back. If he planted it lezera, l'chumra, and then he changed his mind, so his machshava to eat it brings it back into the chiyuv of the mind. Okay, that's important. No, it's my change of mind can bring it from the kula to the chumra, but not the other way around. But if when he bought it to eat it, and then he didn't eat it, he changed his mind. He doesn't have the power through his machshava to remove it from the obligation. So here you see, it's not consistent. It's not what you had in mind when you bought it. It's really about in what direction you're going. Now that we mentioned this whole concept of buying it lezera, and the Gemara made a statement, even ein zarei kala will better appreciate it. when we will review the halachos of planting tevel itself. So first of all, I want you to know like this, that there is a machlokes rishonim that we learned together, whether the isur of planting tevel is doiraisa or the rabban. The reason why some people say it's doiraisa is because, like we mentioned, you cannot have hana'ah from tevel. On the other hand, when zaroi kole, what you are planting won't be there anymore. Whether it's doiraisa or the rabbanan, vadai, there's an isur to plant tevel. Now, we learned in a brayso that ein zoyden tevel. Not only may you not plant tevel, but even if tevel was already planted, and all you are doing is you are adding some earth over the earth that's over the seed. You can maybe you can say it was already planted. I know that your adding earth is beneficial to whatever needs to happen, but it was done already. That's the chiddush. Not only may you not plant it, but the ein mechapin tevel. Can't even cover it. However, there is a line. What's the line? Avo machapim im hagoy tevel. So we're speaking about assisting a goy. Now, assisting a goy plant may not be done. You cannot even assist a goy plant. But if the goy already planted, and now the goy wants to put another layer of earth over it, here is where you could do it with the goy. At kedei kach, we go far away from planting tevel. Okay, now, shochach v'zara tevel. What happens if a person forgot about this? That means it was b'shoigeg. So now product grew, the herst. Now when product grew, guys, I know that from the new produce, I have to separate trumas and maasros. But one might think that aside of the new trumas and maasros, let's say I planted a saw of seed. From that saw, I would have removed truma and my serishain and my seshain. I didn't remove anything, and I planted it. Now, from the new product, I know I have to separate all of the maasros, but one might have thought prior to separating the new, take from the whole new harvest, from it, first on one saw, separate trumas and maasros, and then you're going to end up giving much more. That's the original, and then give again. That you don't have to do. Once you already planted it, then you are exempt from tithing it, shekfar avad, because the original seed was disintegrated in the ground. And now comes along the Gemara and he says, the only reason why you are exempt, even though you made a violation, is taka because shekfar avad. So now the Gemara is going to make a chilek. Not always is the original seed avad. The davar, says the Gemara now, the davar she'in darkei lihislakei. Another difference. Another difference. When you planted something, how easy or how difficult is it for you to take it back? It depends. Like grains, once you planted them, the way you spread them out, to regather them is very difficult. So because it's not easily gathered up, there is where the Baraisa paskins that you're good. Once you did it, you did. Wow. Look inside the Pnei Moshe, the last of the medium lines, going into the widest lines. But that which we said. Like kernels of grains, like lefes, like tsunoin, turnips or radishes, and ula asroi. Now hold on. Where do we say that? When do we say that even if you planted it, you have to dig it up? We're back in the Gemara now, where that which you planted did not yet sprout. Then and you don't need to uproot it. And as we learned, you don't have to give off any maasros from that part because you already planted it. Okay. Adkan. Now, like we mentioned in the Mishnah, Machloikis by Shem and Arev, which is the last case of the Mishnah, why does Basil say you are exempt? Even though the oil part from it is oil, but since it became fragrant oil, which means there are spices in it, spices are lechatchila exempted from Trumas Maasros, so it's taroivus. Some of it is mechoiv, some of it is spotted. Again, the Amoritz is saying he tithed it. Don't forget about that part. So Basil holds that melechatchila there is no din of the mai on a mixture. And now listen to this. Rabbi Yochanan kanava achol, when he would eat food that he bought from the Amoritz or that he got as a gift, Even kupad, even if he ate meat, you're going to freak out. Meat is not chayv to be taif. Even eggs, afilu beya. Here you have in the Yerushalmi, instead of beitza, beya. Right? We spoke about that whole thing. It's in the beginning of Sanhedrin, where there was, I think it was Rabbi. Rabbi went to a place and he found out that there was a Talmud that was teaching a din about made bitsoyim, which means egg, the egg white. It's not one of the 7 liquids. It's not machshir. So he said made bitsoyim, and they understood murky waters. And waters, even when they get murky, up until a point, they do have a din of mayim, and they are machshir l'kabel tuma. And people that otherwise would have been careful to eat their dough in the state of Tara, they were noyig to eat it betuma, because they thought that if they need it with made bitsoyim, with swamp waters, doesn't matter that you're tamei, the item never became muhsher. Made bitsoyim, and it was from then on that many people, instead of saying the word beitza, they say the word beya. That's over here. But when Rabbi Yochanan ate even meat or even an egg, he would do demai, have a misakin. Now that's a stretch. Why? Amalei Talmidoi loikein yifan Rebbe. Did the Rebbe not teach us that what aser to aser is called tfuazarecha? Tfuazarecha means that which grows. Now I know, just to speak it out like this, guys. Let's go with the Rambam. We learned the Rambam. According to the Rambam, the chiyuv of trumas u'maisa midoraisa, by the way, is not only on tfuah, it's also on tiroish v'yitzor. It's also on wine and on oil, right? And on grapes and on olives. Some other Rishonim hold that midoraisa, it's on all of the fruit. L'kula alma, it's not on vegetables. L'kula alma midrabanan, yes, even on vegetables. But that's the end, not meat, not eggs. Why was he tithing it? The demai answers the Gemara. Du chashash l'mashkin sheyesh bahem. People put oil in eggs. People put oil in meat. Oil is something that has to be tithed. Even though we just learned in the Mishnah that shemen arev, the roiv is shemen, a little bit of spices. It's not about that. It's about taroivs. So you would think that you're kidding if I make a big pot of meat and there's a little bit of olive oil in the bottom of the pot from the amaretz, the olive oil per se is the mai. Taroivs, it's exempt. And a chanami. But Rabbi Yochanan was machmer. And he didn't even know for sure if there was oil. Since there might be oil in there, it's amazing. Ad kedei kach. Now, by the way, that must mean he didn't give, let's say, Meiser Sheni, he didn't take 10% of the meat. That can't be. But he estimated how much oil might there be. You have to be a maven. And that oil is the mine. So he would go ahead and he would separate Meiser and Meiser. And he would separate Meiser Sheni. All right. And now we have the problem. The problem is like this guy's daf zayin on the base again. The chulin, huh?
Would you give it to a kohen?
So the meisim and meisim he would give to a kohen from the meat. No, he would estimate 1%. It's 1% of the oil. He didn't have to separate it from the meat. He would give more. He would give that to the kohen. And meiser sheni, he would probably pay it on money. He's not going to schlep the meat up with the eggs up, and that will be a new mois. Meiser sheni shel the Mishnah wrote again in the first category, Dav Zayin Amud Beis, that if a person bought,
you would still do it if it was like a barbecue steak where there was like wasn't cooked in meat, that wasn't cooked in oil.
If there's no even possibility for oil, but if you're looking at me, I would barbecue with oil. What do I know? I put oil. I don't know. You have to know, like eggs. I don't know where you have Ali. David was looking at me with it. I don't know, eggs in a frying pan. You put oil. I put oil. Whatever it's shaykh. If it's not shaykh,
there's no oil.
Hard-boiled eggs is nothing to talk about. Correct. Okay. Now, if someone grew a product, grain to eat, ta'amaretz, but he sold it to a chaver, the chaver bought it for the animal. The Mishnah says there's no demai. Okay, now we got a problem. The problem is the story, and that's a whole series of stories beginning today, going into tomorrow. So v'lo you are exempt. Now we got a problem. So here first, as an introduction to the kasha on this, there's a very sad story here, and I want to just give a little intro to the story here of Rabbi Yirmiyah and Abse'ela. The Gemara says, the Torah says, "Lo yu'una latzadik kol." I don't know if the pasuk is initially. I think it's initially that God does not allow any inequity to happen to a tzaddik. Now, of course, everyone, as long as we are living, we have freedom of choice. There's no debate about that. We're speaking about when a person sins b'shoigeg. So a tzaddik, God does not allow for the shoigeg inadvertently to sin. Nevertheless, we have an chulin daf hey amid beis. Tosfos divrei maschel v'lat tzaddikim, which I think is the last Tosfos in the Amid. When the Gemara over there is sharing stories how certain times b'shoigeg, like we have over here, a tzaddik did something that you cannot do. How is it even possible? So Tosfos establishes a rule that le'una l'tzadik kol avin only goes to macholos asuros. Macholos asuros is a unique type of prohibition because nasa dam ubasar kipsoroi, it becomes you. And indeed, for non-kosher foods, there are many stories that tzaddikim, again, the amazing, everyone has bechira, but the shorgeg, the tzaddik will never end up eating something that's not kosher. Now, this story will be an exception, and this poses a problem on Tosfos. This story is written in the Medrash. The story is written over here, where the great Rab Zeira, and guys, we learned about Rab Zeira. I know the Babli Zeira Zayin Yud Reish Aleph in the Yerushalmi Zeira, same great Amoida, right? The giant that we call the little giant that Rab Zeira b'shoigeg ate damai. I'm saying damai. I just added damai myself because it removes the problem. Let's go with the approach that damai, which is only asr midrabanan, doesn't mean that the food inherently is problematic. It's a takana on the person, and therefore b'shoigeg. I'm just saying a suggested answer before we read the kasha. The kasha is like this: what happened?
Discussion, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So Rabbi Yirmiyah shalach leRab Zeira chada misana de te'enim dolei misak. I'll tell you more than that. Let's go with the many who hold that, like a Rambam, that even though he holds that Trumas u'Maisros midoiraisa is for sure aser to aser is called tfu azar echa, it also includes tiroi shenitzon, but it doesn't include figs. So let's go that the whole chiyuv of tithing the figs is only midrabanan. It makes it easier to understand. It's a sad story. Now, there's another rule, guys. There's a chazak. Remember, chazaka al chaver she'enoi moitze davar she'ena mesuken netachas yadam. That's a chazaka. I know the Rabbi used to use that in a much broader way. Like when you write something, chaver chazaka, it won't allow something to be printed that's not mesuken. But literally, it means that if a chaver is gifting or selling produce, for sure he covered the Trumas u'Maisros. What happened over here was Rabbi Yirmiyah sent Rab Zeira a gift. Rabbi Yirmiyah told himself, I'm selling it to Rab. I know Rab Zeira wouldn't touch anything without tithing it. So Ma Rab Zeira mechal d'loi misakna. I mean, Rab Zeira for sure. I have nothing to be worried that he will eat it untithed. So I don't feel the onus of tithing it because the recipient, the tzaddik, will do it himself. And when Rab Zeira received it, what did he say? Who sent it to me a gift? Rabbi Yirmiyah. So Rab Zeira said to himself, Sabar Meimar, he thought the words, you think Rabbi Yirmiyah would send to me something that's not tithe? So Ben Dain, Ledain, it's between the thoughts of this one and the thoughts of that one, that what turned out was that Isachal Tevel, that Rab Zeira ate Tevel. And it must be these tzaddikim, he felt something is wrong, which is why next day when they were together, so Rab Zeira asked Rabbi Yirmiyah, Hahi Misanta, that basket, the Shilachli Esmo that you sent me yesterday, Misakna Havas. Like, why would he even ask? He felt something is off. He says, what are you talking about? Ominous, of course, I didn't do it because I told myself, Rab Zeira Mechel Mila V'lei Misakna. And Amalei and Rab Zeira says, Ufani Ominous, just like you thought, I also thought, tragically, Hava Rab Yirmiyah Mishalach Lemila V'lei Misakna. Now, why are you bringing this story? We're bringing the story because this will give light to the next statement. Now, many people heard the statement. We are Talmidim of the Rosh, and he used to quote this next statement the whole time, literally. That Rab Abba Bar Zvina says, in the name of Rab Zeira, now you know why Rab Zeira said it. In what context? He said like this, if the tzaddikim of the prior generation, if we're going to consider them to be angelic, he was pointing out how there was a Yeridas Hadoiros, how the people of the prior generation, they were greater people. If they are considered angels, then we are only considered sons of man, not sons of angels. We already begin deficient. The haven b'nei nashon, if you will consider the earlier ones to be people, is anon chamar, and then we are like donkeys. The Rosh applied it to all of us, but then he added Rab Zeida. And when I say donkeys, I'm saying Amar Avmana. Why did he make that statement? And now you know the context. And what Rab Zeida said or meant, and donkeys, not even like the donkey of Rav Pinchas ben Yair. We can't even compare ourselves because the donkey of Rav Pinchas ben Yair would not eat even the mai. And Danny, that's why I think it's the mai. And I, B'shoigig, ate the mai.
But I just had a thought. Can we say that Rav Zeira himself wasn't the one that ate it? Because it doesn't say that he ate it. It says, at least the way the article translates, between this one and this one, it says, Tevel was eaten.
You know what? I like what you're saying.
So maybe he wasn't him. Maybe it was his housekeeper. And then, but he felt there was something off. And the next day he approached his, I don't know.
Could be.
Yeah, he doesn't say Rav Zeira.
And I want to go back to the donkey. That donkey happens when you are. I'll explain in a moment. There's no chiyuv on a donkey. Like we said, that's the whole problem with our Mishnah. You planted, not only if you planted for an animal, are you exempt from Tumas Umaisris. If you sold it to the purchaser who bought it from the animals, you're also exempt. Like, why wouldn't even the donkey eat it? Elamai, because the owner wouldn't eat it. The owner had a chumrah. Rav Pinchas ben Yair had a chumrah that even though the Mishnah says libahema, you're patet, he was machmed, and then the donkey reflected his chumrah. So maybe the bnei bayis of Rab Zeira should have reflected the chumrah. Okay, good. Okay, very good. I like what the Gabbai is saying. If you didn't hear it, he's saying that maybe he didn't need it.
It's not a chumrah. As opposed to donkey. It was a person.
It's a person, correct. But this just the link that the chamoir reflects the madrega of the owner, that the bnei bayis reflects the madrega of the. Okay. Now, what's the story of Rav Pinchas ben Yair? Let's go, guys. Chamorti Rav Pinchas ben Yair. The donkey of Rav Pinchas ben Yair is ganevuna listoy balayla. You have these bandits that they stole it at night. Why is that detail important? I don't know. Right? Bandits can steal a listing is can stole it at night. And Abdis Tamura Gaboin Kolosiyam.
Because they steal during the day, and it's
maybe huge.
So then you're miyayish.
You're miyayish, and if you're miyayish, then the donkey would eat. The problem was it's all at night, and they were keeping it for 3 days. The problem was the donkey was stubborn. It wasn't touching anything. Why not? Because guys, the food that these listim had were also stolen foods. So the donkey was reflecting the owner. The owner would never eat stolen foods. The donkey also would not eat stolen foods. After 3 days, at a certain point, the problem was they were hiding in a cave. And they understood that the donkey cannot live that much longer. And if they're not going to allow the donkey just to go, then the donkey will die and he's going to smell up their living quarters. That's what they said. So is Malchun, they decided Machzar to return it to the owner. It doesn't mean that they went to the address and they returned it there. They understood to let the donkey go. The donkey will go back to the owner. And why? They're not doing shuba. They didn't want, if the donkey would die, it's going to smell up the ma'arta that they were hiding and that they lived. So afkuna, all they did was that they shoot it out of the cave. And oslas becomes alturi, and the donkey, like a good donkey, it went back, schmeck back to the door of the owner, and but it was locked. What happens after you have a geneva? You fix the lock. See, the donkey couldn't get back in. So what did the donkey do? Shuras menaharka. It began to speak donkey language, like hello, let me in. And Pinchas ben Yair heard his donkey. So Amaloin, he says puschain lahada alifta. He had rachmanis. Pinchas ben Yair knew that his donkey is starving. So go quick. He says, open up the door for this alifta. Alifta is this poor thing. There is law to loss because I know that for 3 days it ate nothing. And indeed, psachon leiva alas law. So they opened the gate. Now, how do you feel Matzah Yom Kippur? Better not to look how people are eating. So the donkey, you would think after 3 days, now that they would place food in front of it, it would devour it. Look at the tzaddik, the donkey. So the donkey is so hungry. Amaloin. So the Brichon says, Yahavu lei klum techel, give him something. So they gave in front of him barley. Guys, barley is food for animals, which is exempt from Maasros. and the donkey is skafia, nesnisht. Amalei Rebbe, so they told the Pinchas Rebbe, loy boys mechel. It's on a hunger strike. Doesn't want to eat. So Amaloin, so to which the Pinchas ben Yair asked, Misaknan inun, did you or were you misaking it? And let's go like this. Since, as the Rashidil says, he knew what they gave him was the mai, not tevel vade. We learned in our Mishnah that the mai lebehema is exempt. Nevertheless, Rav Pinchas ben Yair had a chumrah, like we just learned. Rabbi Yochanan was machmer taroives the mai taroives oiched the mai. Did you take off the mai halachas from the food? And they said yes. Now they said yes. They were not lying, because since they knew that the mai doesn't have to be tied at all, what they understood when he asked them, "Were you misaking it?" Misaking it begashmias. In other words, could be the food had in it pebbles, had in it, and the animal maybe was more refined. Or after starving for 3 days, you have to be careful what you put in your body. Your body needs koyach to digest. Maybe the animal was not eating it. They thought they're asking him, did you sift through it? So that's what they understood. And they said, yes. Amaloin, the mayon, did you take it out of its demai status? He asked them the faders, to which they said, why would we? Did the teacher not tell us? And quoting our Mishnah, that even if you purchase it either to plant or la behema, or according to Mishnah, or if you buy, you purchase a flour, but you're planning to use it in the tanning process, kemach loinus, or if you buy oil, but not to consume the oil, only to use it as fuel, shemelaned, or shemelas, the Mishnah says it's completely exempted. And we didn't, but we don't have to. No. Man, what can we do with this poor creature? The machmara al garmei sagin. The donkey is very machmer on itself. So they heard that the donkey is machmer. They removed the demai and it ate the same barley. Now, just to make it clear, that since Rav Pinchas ben Yair, that's really the meaning. Rav Pinchas ben Yair was machmer on himself. The animal doesn't have bechira. So the animal reflected, you understand, the chomer of Rav Pinchas. I'm saying that I'm machmer. And since I'm Ahmed, and it's reflected by my chamoir, and as Chassidus says, chamoir means chumrius. So we have within us the chamur part of us, the coarser part within us, and great tzaddikim that are able to do the real avodah of hisabcha. That has such an effect, not only on themselves, but it elevates, it transforms even their physical chamoir. And the chamoir now is reflecting the avodah of the tzaddik. When a person doesn't have the koyach of his sabcha, what are we meant to do? To have his kafya. His kafya means I'm denying it. If I'm denying my chamoy, I will by default never affect my animals because I'm denying it. Only a tzaddik has the koyach to elevate an animal. Because if a person is misasik and avodah of his kafya, you can never affect your animal. I don't think your animal will then have a skafia. Your animal won't have a skafia because I separated myself from my animal. Why will my elevation affect the animal? For me to elevate my animal, I have to elevate my animal. So since that tzaddik, he was mishapech his chamoy, so his physical chamoy also reflected the tzaddik. Let's learn one more story. I know we have 1 more minute. We have one more story. And listen to this. Train miskanin afkun train se'in sa'arim. There were 2 poor people that were traveling, and they had within their possession, each one had 1 saw of barley, and they wanted to leave it in a home that they can trust. So they left it. Gabe, Rav Pinchas ben Yair, they left it with him, and when they traveled on, they forgot to pick it up. Now, the Medrash Rabbah says that they forgot it with him for 7 years. The Gemara in Yerushalmi does not write it, and I think I'll explain why. So here, Zadum, now what's the din? If someone entrusts with you a item, what do you have to do? You have to guard it for them. Are you mechuyev to work with it? No. We learned in Bava Metzia, only if the item is going to be lost. I would say that these barley grains would not get lost. They don't go bad. They don't go bad. No, you can store grains. That was wealth. They stored it. The Hurda stored grain, and then 100 years later, you had if it happened, what they say happened in Matzada, you had a few hundred people living off. So what happened was is that he was machmer. Zarun, Bechatzdun, Ba'alun, what did he do? He planted it and he harvested it and he brought it in. All right. Now, according to the Medrash, they only came back 7 years later. So the story is almost natural. That he planted it and he harvested it and it grew. And then the next year he kept on doing it. By the time they came back, he had a whole treasure to give them. According to the Yerushalmi, I don't think we're going with the 7 years. We're trying to show how he elevated the Gashmi. The elevation of the Gashmi means, number one, that your donkey is mirroring your behavior. Your donkey is mirroring your behavior. And elevating the Gashmi means that if you are elevated, if you are rich, beruchnius, you become rich begashmius. If a person is doing his skafia, I elevated myself. I'm denying my lower part. So my lower part remains the way it is. I removed myself from it. His sabcha means I'm elevating it. So it becomes elevated. So there was a bracha in his produce. He became wealthy. The so'idim that he planted once, grew mishuga for the good. Is Bayan Mesav Sharaim when they came to pick up their barley, Armaloin and Pickle told them, you know what, you need to pick up your barley. You left a saw. You know how much you need? Aisun Gamlaya v'Chamoraya v'Sabun. You have to bring camels and donkeys to be able to bring up the abundance of what you had. So there isn't only a refinement there is a blessing. The wealth, Beruchnius, goes into the wealth, Begashmius.
I don't really understand the story.
I understand the story, but let's leave it for the Zoom. Guys, you have to be here in life.